Hello, and welcome to Worried About Nothing. Today we're talking about relationships. I'm Danielle.
And I'm Kim.
And I'm Katya.
Welcome to our show today. So, guys, how do we feel about relationships?
Well, I think we're going to talk about relationships and spirituality, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, how do we connect with people? For me, I personally find that it's actually easier to talk to non spiritual people. For the reason being that there is not a lot of concepts and people are not so much stuck on the idea that things has to be certain way. So for example, I have a friend. And whenever I talk to her about spirituality, she knows it all. She read all the books. She knows all about yogas. You can't say a word to her. She tried everything. She tried meditation, and all she sees is pictures going in front of her eyes. And she stopped meditating because she doesn't go anywhere else, but she knows all about it. And then I have another friend who doesn't believe in spirituality, but I think in a way she's more spiritual than the first friend. And I had an example where we were talking about flowers. And I was saying, well, since I started working with Aretim, I noticed that a lot of the flowers are flowering and they're looking lush and green and beautiful. And I mentioned that about the aura and the light. And she's like, well, I don't believe in that. But what she said, I do believe that you can be more present and you can notice when the flowers need watering. I was like, oh, that's amazing. That's a different perspective, but she's totally right. So that was my personal experience.
Yeah, I feel like I've found the similar type of thing. And it's like, it's not even whether or not I know that they're actually spiritual or have any thoughts towards spirituality, but it's just like in regular conversation, I find that people are just saying things that seem rather profound. And it's not I don't have any examples that really come to mind, but I just know that I'll have conversations with people and then something that they say will really hit me and I'm like, "Wow, that's really deep." Yeah, yeah. And just really resonates on some level. And then with people who are a little bit more spiritually minded or have a lot of concepts about spirituality, then it's like depending on the school of thought that they subscribe to, then it's like that's the only possibility and nothing outside of that. That's not what this book says. It's not what this doctrine says. So that's not it. It's like, oh, okay, okay, yeah. And they just write everything else off.
Yeah, I agree. I find that can happen quite a lot. I think in inverted commas, I'm gonna have to put it in inverted commas, the spiritual world, there are too many people that I've met anyway in my experience who have discovered spirituality, therefore think that they've discovered the meaning of life and they've suddenly become a guru and they know everything. And their purpose or the self-proclaimed purpose is to teach everybody where they're wrong and how they're right, they themselves are right. And it just makes it very uncomfortable. It's not a natural conversation, it's not a connection, it's a student teacher dynamic that you don't ask for and you don't want, but it's presented to you sometimes in that fashion. And so I think with people like the second friend you were talking about, Katya, the one that just mentioned you need to water the plants, that's somebody having an interaction with you, that's somebody connecting on a topic rather than going, okay, I have so many concepts about plants, I now know all about plants, I'm going to teach you all of my knowledge about plants so you can learn from me and be grateful, basically is sometimes the way that it can come across. And it's just incredibly off-putting. I mean, it kind of translates not just in relationships with other people as in interactions, but romantic relationships can be even worse when that's the case. I've had a couple since since I started the spiritual path, and oh my god, it's not fun because it can sort of turn into almost like a them wanting to one-upmanship you. In fact, well, not the last, but one of my ex-boyfriends was out on the inverted commas spiritual path as well, and he would periodically measure our progress. So he'd always say things like, "So you're slightly ahead now, but I'm going to catch up, and then I'll be able to teach you this, and then I'll know more." And I don't know why I was in that relationship actually, but it was just kind of, oh god, it just becomes a competition. in, you know, spiritual ego competition, which is one of the worst ones you can have.
And how was he measuring? Who was it? And how did he do that? Was he reading it or?
No, he didn't think he was reading it. He had some mental idea of how spiritual a certain thing was or whatever it was. And so, I mean, I'm sure I had plenty of spiritual ego too, but my main drive, I think, was to try and, you know, develop and learn. And so I'd share things, not in a kind of I'm teaching you way, but, oh, I learned this at this course today. And he'd always say things like, yeah, but I knew that already. Or, yeah, but everyone knows that. Or, oh God, you're really behind.
Whoa.
What the hell? Oh my God.
Doesn't sound like a good relationship to me.
It wasn't.
Whoa.
But I think I was kind of, because I hadn't really had relationships with people who are spiritual, as it were. This was one of my first ones. And so I didn't really know what it was supposed to be like. And because you have that kind of connection at the beginning, because you're both interested in similar things, or so you think, there's a sort of fake bond that almost is formed. And as time goes on, it just gets more and more kind of icky, or it did in my experience. It just wasn't natural. It wasn't very open, and it was completely codependent. It was quite hideous. And I'm going to stop talking about it now.
No, and that's kind of interesting. And I talk about my husband not being spiritual, but there are many things he says that I'm thinking, wow, he does practice spirituality, but I think he's really advanced, which is kind of weird because, like, when we had an argument, he told me, please, can you do me a favor and don't go into victimhood mode? Basically, don't play victim because it's really hard for me to pull you out of there.
Wow.
I was like, okay, I'll try not to do that. Thank you.
Just what you want to hear in an argument, though.
Yeah, right. I don't know how receptive to that I would have been.
So you're going, oh my God, you've just wounded my ego, and you're right, damn it. It's like a double whammy.
Yep.
Oh, there was another example. He's talking to his dad. This is about our son. And he's telling him, because his dad wants to teach our son how some letters in French and how to speak French. And he's only 4 years old. And he's telling him, hey, Dad, stop pleasing everyone. Let him enjoy his childhood. Let him please himself. First, stop let him like please the teacher because he knows all these letters and numbers and things like that. So I was like, oh, wow. Oh, that's impressive.
Wow.
Of course, his dad didn't like it. I was like, and pretty much hung up. So I don't think he liked when he'd been told what to do. But basically, my husband told him, stop creating somebody else from our son. Let him enjoy who he is and let him discover who he is. So that was kind of nice.
That's great. That's brilliant. Yeah.
Mhm.
Whereas if he had been, in inverted commas again, spiritually minded, he would have gone, no, but, and said something really, you know, I can't think of an example, but yeah, you know what I mean. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it is interesting, isn't it, that how something that on the surface, I mean, just talking about the spiritual arena, you know, on the spiritual journey, and everyone's definition and interpretation and experience of the spiritual journey is so different, but just using the kind of the love and light brigade, as it were, as an example, something that is supposedly all about connection and oneness and heart to heart communication and all of these amazing, wonderful things that are so important, can so quickly and subtly and horribly become this one-upmanship, or this superiority, or this, you know, closed off blocking of other people. So people will say all the right words. So people will, like, for example, there was a couple of people I used to know when I was in the sort of spiritual circles in London, and they were talking once. We were out for a drink, and they were talking about how people judge them all the time for what they do. You know, they did some psychic reading type work, and instead of, you know, either being hurt by it or rising above it or any of these things, they were both going, well, they know not what they do, you know, quoting the Bible, quoting Jesus, you know, kind of thing, in a sort of, well, they obviously are ignorant and stupid, therefore we shouldn't care about their opinion kind of thing. and they're just so judgmental, so, forget them kind of thing. And they went on for quite a while about this, but in the most humongously judgmental way. So it was kind of, they were judging these people for judging them, but they were judging them worse than they were being judged, while feeling very superior about it all. And it was just horrible to sit there and watch, because all the right words were there, so it was, oh, well, love and light, and we'll feel compassion for them and all this kind of thing. But it was just basically a building block or building wall of judgment that just separated them even further. It was just, very unappealing.
Yeah, I feel like it's common now to hear people talk about the stuff that you don't like in other people is stuff that you actually are like don't like in yourself, and you're just recognizing it outside of you. And it's one thing to hear words like that, like a teaching kind of in that way. But for me, at least, it's taken a while to actually understand it, to understand like what that means and kind of how to process it. So when I recognize something, there's a reaction. So some sort of, it usually feels like some sort of contraction or something, right? Just something registers as like, whoa, this isn't good in my physical body or maybe in my emotional body, but I feel it like in a physical way. And then it was so conditioned, I guess, within me to just push that feeling of like, this doesn't feel good away as a blaming sort of thing that it doesn't change the response in the future. So when I started to learn that, like, you can somehow get past this sort of reaction, it still took me a long time to realize. It's more recent that I can kind of like break down the steps of even what happens in the course of initial reaction from hearing it and then the chosen response. So it's like I'm just starting to see how the dominoes fall once the reaction strikes initially. So, I don't know, it's just an interesting thing because it sounds so simple that what you're reacting to is just something that you don't like within yourself. I don't know, I guess it was kind of like a what to do with it? I don't know. I'm not sure where I'm going with this,
Mm.
but, I must be learning it now, right? Because it's something that I'm just coming aware of and I don't really have the words for it, but I can feel something changing within me in understanding more deeply that concept. So when I have more words to it, maybe I'll speak about it again, but
Mhm.
that's about all I got on it for now. Probably sounds mostly like rambling, but
No, it made total sense. And I think there's a couple of factors, though, that come into play as well in that example. In that the first one is, I don't think that everything you see in other people is a reflection of something you don't like in yourself. I think it's important to check whether it is. And if it is, yes, then work with it. And if you're maybe not consciously aware of it, dig deeper and see if you can, find it. But I don't think it always is. Like, if I see somebody going around stabbing people in the face, it's not that I have this burning desire to stab people in the face, or have that tendency, So I think it can be a very sort of pat answer that spiritual, in inverted commas, people will say. It's like, oh, well, it's all about, your stuff. Because I think when you get to the heart of saying it, and saying that from the place of the heart, that's very different. But often it can be a very pat, slick answer. It's like a pushing it back at you. So it's kind of like a, well, I'm not going to take responsibility for my stuff, so it must be you, which is deflection. And that's not right. That's not spiritual, and that's not helpful in any way. So I think if somebody says it in that way, you're going to have a reaction, because they're basically telling you you're full of shit and you're lying, which you're going to respond to, because one, it's probably not true, or I mean, it might be true in the moment, but if it's not true in the moment, then that's just them being unnecessarily aggressive, and pushing back, and arrogant. So you're going to respond to arrogance. I mean, I tend to, and that kind of leads to the second factor, which I was mentioning, which is the way that it's said. So if somebody says to you, if you react to somebody and they say to you from a place of lovingness and kindness, well, maybe that's something that is a reflection in you, in a way that's helpful to you, or wanting to be helpful to you. That's very different to somebody kind of pushing back and going, no, that's your stuff. Do you see what I mean?
yeah, I think so. I don't know, I was getting kinda like lost in all of the, I don't know. I think something's opening, continuing, because my mind, I just kind of went out there, right? Spaced out a little bit, and I'm like, whoa, in another place. So there must be some sort of expansion going on there. Scrambled something.
Yeah.
But that's true. The more you become aware of yourself and of your own, I guess, your own crap, then you can see the same crap in other people because you become more aware of what they are like and are they really truly speaking to you or are they lying to you? You become more sensitive and you can spot the lies a lot easier than just looking at myself. Certain things just don't feel right. And in the past, I would have questioned them and might come in with my mind. I was like, but it looked good, but it didn't feel right. So I might have come up with an explanation. But now, if it doesn't feel right, well, then I won't follow it.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point as well, because Aratima speaks of that too, doesn't she? And she says that once you've cleared or processed or got to a certain stage or amount of processing, not that you can measure it, but within yourself, you'll sometimes see it externally as well. It's almost like it's once you've got the ability to see it more clearly, it's reflected back to you, so you can see what it looks like. You can experience what it feels like.
Mhm.
So there's so many different aspects to that, I think. But I think it's also important to acknowledge, I feel, how honest your own response is and how you react to things. So if you have a reaction to something, allow it, be with it, because that's your reaction. Because I think it can be so easy in this sort of spiritual world. I keep putting my fingers up in inverted commas, but in the spiritual world, to push away anything that's negative. So, oh my God, if I'm feeling angry, I mustn't feel angry because that's so unspiritual. Or if I'm feeling hurt, I shouldn't feel hurt because I'm supposed to be all about love and light, all this stuff. Whereas I feel that the genuine and honest response is to react and have an emotional reaction, not necessarily attached to it or attached to it at certain degrees, but to stop any emotional reaction to something, even if it's a distant emotional reaction, if that makes sense, is denying it, because it's all about the experience of it, I feel, in my opinion. So because I used to struggle against this before I met Aratima and I was part of this Love and Light Brigade. I used to struggle with the fact that I would have emotional reactions to things and I would get angry about things, or I would disagree with things, or I'd swear when people were being all so gentle and lovely, all this kind of stuff. But then since studying with Aratima, I'm seeing more and more that it's about the genuine truth of the moment. So however you react, however you respond is the truthful response in that moment. And that's the important thing. It's not about what the external viewer or even your own viewpoint is telling you should be right or wrong. So if somebody says something rude to me, I'm not going to kind of turn my other cheek and go, oh, that's fine, yeah, call me or whatever you want to call me. I'll have an emotional reaction to it and I might say something, and if it comes from that place of truth, then it's true. So
Mhm.
if I punch them in the face, if that's true, that's true.
No, totally. But also, I wanted to say something that I think some of the people that I met in spiritual communities were quite open minded. And I think as long as they're not really stuck on one's concept, it's really a pleasant relationship. So, for example, I had a colleague at work, and we had some of the most amazing conversations I've ever had. Instead of working, we were chatting away about spirituality and global events and what's happening and, trying to multitask and do some work. And it was really amazing. It was true connection because she wasn't so much stuck on, like, in her opinion that things has to be this way. She was open to listen to whatever I had to say to her. And I think the same for me. And she had some indigenous background, so it was really, really amazing to hear some of the indigenous stories. So I learned a lot. So I wouldn't disregard spiritual people as completely not worthy having relationship with. I think it's just how open-minded they are and how are they willing to accept other people's views or opinions and just be open to them and see how it feels to them, I guess.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You're right. It's not about discounting a whole, swathe of the population in one fell swoop or anything like that. But just there's a certain type of spiritual person that I've met who has that closeness, the closed-mindedness. And we all have closed-mindedness in various areas, so it's not like I'm sitting here saying I'm a perfect person and you all need to learn or anything like that. And of course, there's some open, lovely people. I mean, I met so many in the spiritual community when I was in it.
But the connection can be quite deep.
Mm.
And I remember we were sitting together and seeing the sparkles of light together at the same time. It's like, oh, wow, this is amazing. When both of you can
Nice.
see the same things.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
It can be, I think, going back to what we were talking about development and growth, I think with relationships, I think any kind of relationships, whether it's friendships or partners or whatever it is, there has to be that allowance for growth and change. And in some spiritual relationships, there isn't that allowance because it's kind of a wanting to put you in a certain box and there you live for the rest of your life kind of thing. And that can happen in the non-spiritual communities as well. But when that happens and then you yourself or they grow or change or evolve or develop in some way, if there isn't that allowance for that to happen and that space for that to happen, then there's going to be a pulling away and there's going to be a non, I don't know what the word is, a non-confluence. Is it confluence or something like that? A non thing. Oh, I'm so erudite today. A non-balance or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think it's either like you grow together or you grow apart. You can try to stifle your own growth, but I think as long as you're still living, that's kind of the point is to continue to grow. So to try to stay static or keep yourself one way, especially to try to like maintain certain relationships, I don't think it's going to work out too well for you or for the other people. It can be tough though, right? Because you form relationships and you have they might be deep relationships at times, and you really connect with the people. That's why maybe you cared to form the relationships with them in the first place. So it can be hard when you feel like you're outgrowing that kind of situation. I think I see some people who get kind of stuck a little bit with trying to maintain the same friend group, and it's just not quite working for them. I yeah, it's a tough thing to do though because it's like I can understand not wanting to, lose a friend that you feel like you've been so close with for so long, but I feel like the ones who are meant to come with you will like grow with you.
Mhm. And sometimes I found that the easiest relationships are the ones that you don't have to manage. The
Mm.
ones that you don't have to constantly think that, oh, well, you have to keep in touch or you have to do this. They just come and stay naturally and you get in touch whenever it feels right to you.
Mhm.
Oh, to them, right? So,
And also the ones I think that are really important are the ones that in which both people, or at least one person, respects and loves themselves enough to let you go or to let the relationship go. In that, an example is that I have a friend that I've known since we were 5, so we've known each other our entire lives. And about, what was it, a few years back, she decided to drop me as a friend because I was going through an incredibly spiritual, arrogant, horrible phase in my life, and it was just I was being an asshole basically. And she just cut it dead. And at the time, I didn't understand it because I was going through this I'm right about everything phase, even though I didn't realize I was going through that phase, and I can see it now. And then when I recorded my first podcast, a little short one, the first one on our channel, and she listened to it and she got back in touch with me. And she just said, she was so happy for me that I'd made this shift out of being an asshole that she cried and she just said, I'm so happy for you. And it wasn't even, there was no guilt trips, there was nothing. It was just, I'm just so happy for you. And, this is wonderful kind of thing. And we're back in touch now again, but on a completely different way, in a completely different way now. And I have so much respect for her for doing that because she could have just very easily gone along with it, because she's one of these people that's very kind-hearted, so she will go along with things for a long time. But she'd respected herself and loved herself enough to not put up with me being an arsehole. And good on her. So I think that can happen sometimes in relationships too. You can go along on a kind of similarish path, and then there's a bit of a fork in the road, and then you lose touch, and then you get back together, not back together, but back in contact or back in relationship. But that takes openness. It takes a certain level of openness and lack of prejudgment. So like her reaction to me was not, oh my God, you were horrible back then, but you're nice now. It was, I'm just so happy for you right now. It's all about the now. This is what it is. It's the moment, and that's all that matters, really, because it is moment by moment. But it made me very happy, and I'm very glad that we're back in touch and we're back with friends again, because it's a lot of years to lose as a friend, friendship. It's a long time. But that's also one of the things that happens, because when you are, and I can speak about people being arrogant and spiritual on the spiritual path, because I did it for years, so I know what it's like. And you drive people away, because it's not about connection. It's not about heart to heart. It's not about real love. It's about how much do I know and how much can I show you that I know, to an extent. And sometimes that's unconscious. But if you're having a conversation with somebody, and instead of really listening to them, your mind is going, okay, so what can I gather to tell them? What can I, what teachings can I share? Even if you're doing it in I'm loving them and I want to help them way, you're not listening to them.
Yeah, and I guess you want them to listen to you and to follow your advices and do everything you suggest to them.
Yeah. So that happened to me once. There was this woman I did a bit of part-time work for, and she decided to fire me within a week. And it was a good thing, because I was very bad at that job. But instead of sitting me down and going, well, you're kind of bad at this job, she decided to give me a spiritual pep talk and tell me how I needed to be XYZ, and how she was, with huge amounts of love and compassion, was letting me go because the path wasn't right, and blah, 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 all this stuff. And I just sat there feeling so uncomfortable, because it was really, really hideous. I was basically being lectured. And I would have much preferred her to say, look, I'm really sorry, but you're terrible at this job. I'm going to have to let you go. Here's today's wages. Bye. But she decided she needed to love me into leaving. And her version of love was to lecture me and tell me where I was wrong, what was going wrong in my life.
That's so much worse than being like, you're not good at this job, is being like, well, you're screwing up your whole life.
Nothing right.
All right, here's how you're messing up absolutely everything.
Yeah. And you're fired on top of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And now you don't have a job, so. But I love you, so.
Yeah. I say I do, but I don't really. I know, it's funny.
Yeah, I do know what you mean, though, because there are certain situations where it's when people try to be nice because they think that's what they should do. It like goes back to the politeness conversation that we had. And it's just like, I don't need this necessarily. It's like, I don't really need all this nice stuff. And it makes it feel very uncomfortable. And you're like, it's the energy of it, because the words just don't match what's going on. So it's like incredibly awkward.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I find that increasingly as well, that if the words and the energy don't match, it's almost like you're being smacked in the face, because it comes across as lies, it's untruth. And I would much rather somebody tell me bluntly that I've messed up, or they don't like the way I've done something, or I've offended them, or whatever it is, because then you can have a conversation, you can communicate about it. Whereas, if everyone's doing the nicey thing, it's kind of like, oh no, it's fine, no, I love you, it's great, have a great day, all this sort of stuff. So, well, okay, I don't know what to do with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that must be hard. I don't think I've experienced anything like that. Maybe I did, but I can't relate to that. Most of the times, people just tell me things straight in my face.
Well, I guess because you're so honest, people can be honest, feel they can be honest with you. Maybe.
Maybe. It does feel like they're hitting my ego hard, but I would rather that they do that.
Yeah.
I remember at some point my manager told me, "Hey, you got to watch your language." Basically, be more polite.
What, to customers or to?
It was within the organization.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I just said something really honest, and I think the way I said it wasn't my Russian way. It's like yesterday, I was trying to reach a customer service for my phone provider, and there is this digital assistant, and the digital assistant just couldn't get my question right. And then I was like, "Can I speak to a real human being? You're useless." And I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just learning. I understand that you want to speak to a customer service rep."
The AI is apologizing to you. Oh my god.
Oh, I laughed.
Ugh.
Even my husband laughed. He was like, "Yeah, you can't take this out of you."
That was actually a lot more polite than I was expecting. I was expecting something a bit more swearing and a bit more.
It's like, "I'm paying you full amount. Why are you giving me this robot? I want a real human being." I don't do well with the robot relationship because there is no connection.
In all ways.
I don't know. I think I would choose a spiritual, close-minded person than a robot.
Sometimes they're like robots.
Yeah. And with the robots, you can swear at them repeatedly and they just go, "I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Can you please repeat the question?"
No, usually now they understand. They said, "Okay, what's your language?" or something like that.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, that's funny.
Relationships, though. Yeah. I don't know. I find them to be very challenging. Then adding on learning spiritual stuff. So kind of like being in a war zone. It's different when you're like handling your own inner relationship with yourself, right? Because then you just have your own thoughts kind of to contend with your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own emotions. And then you add in somebody else and you have no idea what level of awareness they possess. And then it's like, I don't know, at least for me, it gets really challenging. It's like, what's what? It's like going through laundry. It's like, okay, we bought the same socks. I can't tell which ones are mine and which ones are yours. So how are we gonna figure this out?
Yeah. Yeah, it can make it a lot more complicated. And I think particularly if one or both people are on that sort of spiritual path of wanting to explore or wanting to understand or work things through and sort things out, it can sometimes add an extra layer of complexity to it, because let's say you're in a boyfriend girlfriend relationship and neither of you are on a spiritual path, neither of you care about that kind of thing. So the things that you'll talk about would be, I feel this, you feel that hurt me when you did that kind of thing. Whereas if you add in the aspect of the spiritual aspirant or journey or whatever you want to call it, particularly if that person has a lot of training in spiritual modalities and ways of talking and all of these things that put rules and regulations on, it can get really complicated because, first of all, sometimes you can't talk honestly about things because it has to be, well, I feel that the way that you said that might potentially have made me feel slightly this way, but I don't want to hurt your feelings by saying that. So is that, it gets really roundabout. And also there can be a really deep dive sometimes into like you said earlier, Danielle, the reflection aspect of it. So that you can, going back to this ex-boyfriend I had, we used to have hour-long conversations sometimes about well, the reflection of you and me and this doing this, and it's because mirroring all this sort of stuff. I mean, it's a hugely toxic relationship, and I'm so glad that's over. But then an interesting aspect of that is that you attract to you what you are, in a way, in that back then when I was in that relationship with him, despite the fact that I was learning about love and light and loving yourself and respecting yourself and feeling your importance in the world and all this kind of thing, I had a very low opinion of myself. So I really didn't love myself at all. I didn't like myself at all. I had no respect for myself at all. So I attracted that in a partner. So he came along, confirmed to me, yep, absolutely, you're right. You shouldn't love yourself. You shouldn't respect yourself, and you shouldn't in any way like yourself. And here's why. And I'll tell you repeatedly, So in some ways, it was a very valuable relationship because it taught me just how low I could go in my estimation of myself. And the things that I would put up with in the name of inverted commas love. And it was not love at all. It was it was a battlefield. It was toxic as hell and very manipulative and all of these things. But it just showed how willing I was to dive into all of that through complete lack of respect and lack of caring for myself. And being able to now see it more from a distance and know that I love myself more than I did then. I know I could love myself more, but the part of me that loves myself more is looking back at that going, why? Oh my God, how the hell, why the hell were you in that relationship? Which is good.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting, like, as we grow and our perspectives change and stuff like that, kind of when we look back at relationships that we've had or, maybe even certain interactions, like, how we can see them differently. Because I know that I was getting some perspective on a relationship that I was in, and I just thought it was amazing, like, because I thought the issue that I was having was with the way that he was behaving, and then I had realized, I was like, "Wow," I was like, "I also do this," and I had no idea that I was also doing it, so I was like, "Whoa," like, it's huge, and probably would have been, really different in our relationship had I recognized that I was also doing it, you know? It's like, "Oh, wow, well, he did it in this way, and I was also doing it in, like, this other way." It's just, it's really interesting to see and have that perspective now.
That's human nature, though, isn't it? It's that whole thing, like, the parable in the Bible about, pointing out the speck in somebody else's eye and not paying attention to the massive beam that's coming out of your own one, because we like to point to others and go, well, it's you're doing this. And if it is something that we're doing, it's likely that we do it a lot more or just as much, but we just don't see it.
Right, what I was experienced was that his was an outward expression, like, he was actually doing it in an outward way, where mine was internal. It's like I was doing all of the things that I needed to do on the surface to engage with life, but internally I was totally, like, withdrawn, and I didn't want anything to do with life, where on the surface, most of the time, he was just kind of, like, disengaging. So, it was just so interesting to see, and I was like, "Wow, I'm doing it. That is my energy, but it's just not my outward expression." Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had terrible relationships similar to Kim, and I was on spiritual path. No, my ex-partner was on the spiritual path. I don't think that I look back and say, why did I do that? I think I understand why. There was a big lesson or several lessons for me to learn. And one of them to learn to love myself. And another one, not wanting somebody to abuse me and to, like, even mentally, felt like I was nobody in a way. I was feeling ugly and this and that, and all the non-loving things. But at the same time, I think it was also good because in some way I was totally crushed and I was ready for something new to emerge and was ready to rebuild myself. So I wouldn't say, even though I think it's lasted for longer than I think it should have, but everything is an experience. We learn from it. For some, it takes less time. For some, it takes more time. But at the end of the day, I'm glad I'm no longer there and I managed to get out.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. Yeah, because I definitely had some very harsh lessons that took me years to learn. Some of them took me years to learn. And also the experience of having that relationship with him led me to a Ratima. So for that, I'm always grateful to him. And sometimes, I think relationships, friendships, or romantic relationships can be really hard, because there is that level of openness that you have to have and that level of vulnerability that you have to have that's really not always easy at all. If you go through life interacting on the surface of people, it's very easy because you can just, present your surface self and just have a non-meaningful conversation, or even if it's a meaningful conversation, it's a one-off or it goes to a certain depth, then you might not see them again or whatever it is. But with people that you have the interaction with all the time or are in that relationship with, allowing them to see you in your full self, so the good, the bad, the ugly, the hideous, the lovely, all of it can be very scary in some ways because you're so vulnerable with that. And the level of intimacy that it demands is something that I haven't yet experienced because I haven't had that kind of open-hearted relationship with somebody where it has been that way, that level of commitment and openness and truth and honesty and vulnerability, because I've just been so closed off all my life with all of that. So it would be interesting to see maybe in the next few years, if I do have another relationship, how that would be different and how I would be in that. Because I think, particularly partner relationships can trigger all your worst stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You do these knee-jerk reactions. I did all the time. It's kind of like, oh my God, I'm turning into a 2-year-old. I'm having a massive tantrum. I can see it happening, but I'm not stopping it, all this stuff. And it's bringing out all your inner child stuff and all your ugly side and everything. I mean, lovely stuff as well, but it's just, having those triggers and learning from them is important. Being able to see the patterns in yourself as well. I mean, I think looking back on my life of relationships, there have been patterns that have carried through. And I think in some ways they all came to a head with this one relationship I was talking about earlier, because it was in some ways the worst one I've ever had. And it was almost like an explosion had to happen to change things. Or I don't know if they've changed things because I haven't actually sort of seen it through with another relationship, but I feel that they have. But they're fun too. Relationships are lovely. There's some lovely aspects.
Well, being able to love the ugly side, that's the challenging part.
Mm.
And just being open to that, and just, if it happened, then you just let it go. You forget about the ugly part. You just let it be, because we all have ugly parts.
Mm.
Well, not all, but I'm sure many of us do.
Yeah. But I guess it's where it comes from, isn't it? The motivation or the commitment or the desire to be in that relationship, because as we were saying earlier in the spiritual community, my fingers are going up again. If it's a case of one-upmanship or a competition, that's always going to be ugly, no matter how many nice bits there might be in a relationship, because the foundation of it is rotten. Whereas if it is a relationship or a friendship or whatever kind of dynamic it is, where both people go in wanting to love each other, wanting to support each other, wanting to grow together, wanting to help each other, then the foundation is more solid. So no matter what the ugly parts are, there's going to be a stronger foundation. You're not going to fall through at the first kind of conflict moment. So that's important. It's just having that foundation of solidness. And I think that takes that level of honesty with yourself and willingness to work through your own stuff, I think, to a degree. To kind of go, well, I'm going to be able to be honest enough to go, yes, my shit is ugly. Not that I'm an expert in any way, shape, or form, but it's just a sense.
Yeah, but you also grow together, and maybe if you have a foundation, then if you grow together, then you build a house together, if you think about it that way. Because we all change, and being able to accept each other after the change and not expecting each other to be exactly the same, or not wanting to revert that person back to where he or she was before. I think that's important in the relationships.
And I think also being willing to, if it gets to that point, to walk away, because often people will cling on to something that's dead because of whatever reason, habit or fear or whatever else. I mean, this relationship I was in a toxic one, I stayed in it way too long. I should have left in about, the first couple of weeks, really, but I stayed in it, a year and something else longer than that. And it wasn't, I shouldn't have done, but I did, and it's fine. It's what it is. But you see that sometimes with people who've been together for decades or whatever it is, and they're still together and they can't stand each other, or they've grown so far apart that they don't even have anything in common at all anymore. I mean, I've never been married. I've never been in that kind of long-term relationship. So again, I'm no expert, but just from my perspective, it's like, well, if you've been together decades and decades and decades and you can't stand each other, surely life apart would be better. Or is it just so habitual that, not standing each other, not being able to stand each other is something you quite enjoy? I don't know.
Yeah, I was gonna say that I think some people actually do enjoy that. They want something to complain about, and it's like as long as they have their spouse there, they can complain about them and vice versa. They might have the same sort of, desire to have that sort of relationship.
Well, it's the fear. So if I leave, what's going to be next? You live in your comfort zone, even though it can be extremely discomfortable, but that's all you know. And because that's all you know, that's your comfort. So stepping away from that is extremely challenging because you've been together for so many years. And then, you married. So in a way, you signed the agreement to be together until you die, type of thing, right? Um, but I think just being able to check if it's still true in that particular moment to be together and face those fears and be okay that if it won't be comfortable, it will be tough, then it's different. I think checking in each moment, or I don't know when it feels right, that if it's still true to be together or not, I think it's important.
Mhm. And I think the tricky part about that is because relationships, at least in my experience by nature, are very emotional. So to kind of get past the emotional part of it, to actually be able to check and sense that truth, you know? Because I know I had asked a question actually on one of the psychic calls with the Ratima, and she said, she's like, "This might not be the right time for you to be asking that question." So you kinda mentioned that too, Katya, right? That depending on the time, like, you ask yourself, because I was too overwhelmed by the possibility of one of the answers that she's like, "Maybe you're just not ready to receive, like, it's not neutral enough." So I found for myself, it's really hard to get to a neutral place to ask a question like that about relationships.
See what I found with my husband, that we had at least a couple of moments. The recent one was the most strongest, where we both felt like we won't be together. And we felt it emotionally. I think we both went through the emotional part of it in a way through the divorce. And then I had to check with myself, is it still right to be together or not? And I had this concept that if you're spiritual, you're most likely to be divorced and this and that. But actually, when I checked at that moment, it felt right to be together. I wanted to be with him and I still loved him. So, and that was his commitment as well. Mm, and I kind of feel it, the relationship a little bit deeper once you went through that emotional part, through that experience of being separate, because you allow for something that might be stagnant to just I don't know what's the right word, to disintegrate maybe. And then there's something new that is emerging. And I had another experience a while back where we both felt like there was a death in the relationship. And then something new began, and it was, as I said, less attached. and less conditioned. And that was beautiful. I think just not going, just letting going through the fear, going through the emotions. I think it's extremely important, and it definitely helps you to grow. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Facing up to things, looking at them and really feeling them. That's lovely. Not taking for granted, not coasting. Yeah. But I guess those are the moments, some of the moments that keep a relationship stuck, glued. That's what makes you stronger, is being willing to go through that, willing to go through the death and come out the other side, not knowing what the outcome will be. That's amazing. That's lovely.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for listening to our conversation today about relationships. What are your experiences in your relationships? Please leave us a comment down below if you're watching this on YouTube. And please let us know if there's anything you'd like to hear us talk about. Thank you for listening. Bye.